This is a 2006 Toyota Prius, and it changed the world. This wasn't the first hybrid car or even the first Prius, but this was the car that popularized the hybrid car. Toyota sold more than 1 million of these globally, and it put the hybrid powertrain on the minds of consumers around the world. This is a very important car, and today I'm going to review this Prius and show you all of its quirks and features. Before I get started, good news, this Toyota Prius is currently for sale and it's being auctioned live on Cars and Bids. This is a one-owner, lifetime in California Prius with less than 40,000 miles on the odometer. So it's a very special example of a very important car, and you can buy it on Cars and Bids. So once you finish watching this video, click the link in the description below to visit the live auction for this Prius, where you can bid on it and buy it only on Cars and Bids. All right, time for the quirks and features of the Prius, the second generation Prius, the 06 Prius, I could say. But regardless of how you describe this car, when you say the word Prius, this is what you think of. These are everywhere, truly ubiquitous. And you might be wondering why I'm reviewing a car that is so common and also so frequently derided by car enthusiasts, hated, in fact, by so many. Well, it's an important car. I'll explain, but let's start with some background. The original Prius came out in 1997, Toyota's first foray into the hybrid world, and it was sold only in Japan. An updated version of this first generation Prius was eventually brought to North America, and it competed alongside the Honda Insight, Honda's first hybrid car, but both of these vehicles were, let's say, compromised. They were expensive for what they offered. They were little cars that were primarily only purchased by people who were seriously interested in environmental causes. You couldn't make the math work. They were too small, too compromised, and too expensive to really get large, widespread sales success. And then, for the 2004 model year, everything changed with the arrival of this, the second generation Prius. For this model, Toyota completely changed everything about the Prius, specifically its design. The car grew 7 inches compared to the original Prius, and it went from a tiny sedan to a sort of mid-sized hatchback. The design was completely different, and it added some needed practicality over that original tiny, kind of compromised first generation Prius. And when you combined that added practicality with this car's reasonable pricing and its amazing fuel economy, more on that in a second, the result was a formula for true success. This was the first hybrid car to break into the mainstream, and not just break in, but smash its way into consumers' minds. It brought hybrid technology to the forefront, and everybody was talking about this Prius when it came out 20 years ago. It was a huge deal. In fact, Toyota managed to sell around 1.2 million of these Prius models globally from 04 to 08 when it was on sale in this generation. It was a massive hit all across the world, and it still is everywhere today. These original second-gen Prius models are still a common sight on the road because they're so practical, so affordable, and they turned out to be reliable and long-lived. But most importantly, this car introduced the concept of the hybrid vehicle as we know it to modern car consumers today. So let's talk about what made the Prius so successful, its primary selling point, the hybrid powertrain. Now, I don't get very technical on this channel, and I'm going to mainly stick to the basics here, but we got to cover this engine. 1.5-liter hybrid 4-cylinder, and it made 110 horsepower, and that was combined, the gas and the electric, all the stuff put together, 110 peak horsepower. It was not particularly potent, especially because it was made into a CVT automatic and front-wheel drive. This car did 0 to 60 in 11 seconds, and even by 2004 standards, that was really slow. The Prius was not a performance car in any sense sense of the term, which gained it a lot of scorn from car enthusiasts. However, when it first came out, the Prius was rated at 60 miles per gallon in city driving and 51 miles per gallon on the highway. Now, that didn't really match what people were actually getting for fuel economy, and the EPA here in the States, which rates cars for gas mileage, was having that problem on a lot of different cars. So in 2007, the EPA completely changed its fuel economy rating procedures for all cars, not just the Prius. The goal was to better reflect real-world driving situations, and the Prius was re-rated at 48 miles per gallon city and 45 miles per gallon highway, which was more in line with the actual fuel economy numbers people were getting. Regardless of the rating, the figures were absolutely massive by the standards of its day. Almost 50 miles per gallon was huge. This was at a time when the regular kind of default midsize SUV, the Honda Pilot, back in 2004, got 20 miles per gallon in combined city and highway driving. Even the Toyota Corolla, the small, efficient Toyota Corolla, struggled to beat 35 miles per gallon in combined city and highway driving. So the Prius showing up and inching towards 50 miles per gallon at this time was a massive deal. Before plug-in hybrids, before electric cars, in fact, the Prius had no real competitors that got fuel economy anywhere close to these numbers. It was huge, and it was world-changing. But in creating the Prius, Toyota didn't just take the hybrid powertrain they developed and stick it inside a popular, beloved car like the Camry or the Corolla. Instead, they purpose-built the Prius to take this powertrain, and these were only offered as hybrids. There was no standard gasoline model. And they didn't just build the Prius as a hybrid, they built it quirky. Very quirky, in fact. One of the most unusual and distinctive elements of the Prius was its design. This long, flat, sloping front end that basically started with the headlights and sloped all the way up to a point above the front seats of the car, and then it started sloping back down the other direction. There was no flat roof on the Prius. It had a very unusual shape to it that didn't look too much like other cars. Now, in the years since this Prius, we've learned that this shape was probably due to aerodynamics. A lot of electric cars have adopted similar shape to extend their range as much as possible, but it looked very unusual in the age of the Prius. And it caused a strange problem in back, where the sloping rear end included some of the rear window, but not all. And so the rear window on a Prius is split. There's a vertical part below and then a rather horizontal sloping part above. And that meant when you looked in the rear view mirror, you saw behind you, but bisected by a large horizontal piece in between the two back windows. It wasn't really the best for visibility, and in my mind, it was the biggest compromise of this car. Kind of an odd decision, but I suppose they figured for aerodynamics it was the best possible thing to maximize fuel economy, even at the slight expense of visibility. Another interesting Prius exterior quirk was the rear lighting, which you can see is clear. The rear light housing is all clear. Now, this was pretty common in enthusiast cars in this era, the famous Altezza taillights, where you had a clear light housing, but then it would light up in the correct color, orange for turn signal, red for brake light. Here, obviously not an enthusiast car, but they brought the clear lighting to the Prius, which gave it kind of a standout design. Actually made it seem sort of modern and futuristic, which went along with the modern and futuristic hybrid powertrain. But the inside of this Prius was undoubtedly way weirder than anything that was going on outside. The interior was totally otherworldly and bizarre compared to the normal sedate cars on the road at the time, and you realize that the moment you climbed inside, one of the first things you saw was the very long sloping windshield that you saw on the outside translated to a long sloping windshield and dashboard design, and Toyota used this to position the gauge cluster in a very odd spot. Instead of directly behind the steering wheel, like in basically every other car, especially back then, they put the gauge cluster at the base of the windshield at the end of this long slope. Combine that weird placement with the fact that the gauge cluster was totally digital, all electronic, it really felt like a futuristic design, especially back then when virtually all other cars had analog dials for the speedometer, the tachometer, and all the other displays. This thing was weird. And the futuristic weirdness didn't stop there. The Prius also had a touchscreen, which was a massive deal in 2004. At the time, it was really only starting to show up on the most high-end luxury cars, an integrated touchscreen, but it was standard on the Prius, which was certainly not a high-end luxury car. Now, there are some benefits and drawbacks of this touchscreen. Probably the biggest drawback is that it integrated all of your climate functions. Now, accessing the climate control was easy enough. You press this large button that said climate, but actually changing something was a little annoying. The screen was slow to respond by modern standards, and most importantly, it wasn't that well thought out. For instance, changing the temperature, you had to individually tap the little up arrow dozens of times to go from cold to hot because there was no dial or no slider, no easy way to change the climate control. You also had a lot of your audio controls integrated into this touchscreen, which had similarly bad issues. You'd press this big audio button to pull it up, and that included all of your radio presets, which meant that you couldn't change the radio station if you were on the climate section of the touchscreen. It wasn't really the best integration, unlike a traditional radio with buttons. But there were cool things about this touchscreen too. For one, just having the screen made the Prius feel futuristic and special, which is kind of what Toyota was going for. This wasn't a normal pedestrian everyday car. This was something different, something new, and a screen included standard was a big deal, and it helped drive home the futuristic specialness of this car. The other cool thing about this screen was that the default home screen was an energy consumption monitor, where you could actually watch in real time precisely how energy was flowing around the car, from the regen braking to the battery to the engine. You could sit there and just watch it. Now, that was really only for kind of the nerdy Prius owners who wanted to check that stuff out, but the point was it was there and displayed for anybody to see exactly how the hybrid system worked in this relatively simplified diagram inside the screen. It drew your eyes and your attention to this futuristic touchscreen in this futuristic car. But beyond the long, deep dashboard, the digital gauge cluster, the touchscreen, there was a lot more weird in the Prius interior. For example, this car had two glove boxes. You can see there's an upper glove box. You open this up and there's storage in here. And there's also a lower glove box. You open this up and there's storage in here. That was a little bit strange. Another unusual item is the rest of the stereo controls were here in the center control stack like normal, and turning on the radio was strange. You didn't press the volume button to turn it on like in most other Toyotas. Instead, there was a separate power button, and the volume button was pushed in to the radio head unit. If you wanted to adjust the volume, you actually had to press the volume button to push it out. Then you could twist the volume knob, and then if you wanted to, you could push it back in, or you could just let it sit out in case you needed to use it again. Definitely a rather strange integration. Another unusual thing the Prius had was this gear selector, which has now become the default normal gear selector in all of Toyota and Lexus hybrid models, and a lot of people are used to knowing how to drive it. But at the time, it was strange. In order to get this car into drive, you pushed it to the left and down, and then it would pop back into sort of a neutral position. To go into reverse, left and up, and then it would pop back into this central position, and neutral was just left center. There was also a component marked B, which nobody really understood, but it was for engine braking. It was similar to a low gear on another type of automatic transmission. You would go into B if you were going downhill and you wanted the car to automatically slow itself down without having to ride the brakes and overheat them. It was a strange setup. So strange, in fact, that in order to educate people about how to use park, Toyota actually had to put this little decal here next to the shift lever that says, please press P to engage park. Even though it was right next to the button that says P, people were so confused, this label had to be printed to explain how to do it. I bet you will not see too many original Prius models that still have this sticker in place, but this is one of them. Another interesting feature of the original Prius, go over to the steering wheel, and you had climate controls on the steering wheel. You can adjust temperature here, turn on the AC, you can turn on circulating air, the defroster. That is very cool, and it negated some of my complaints with the touchscreen and its slow operation, since you had easy access to your climate controls on the steering wheel, although of course the passenger didn't. Now, I think this is the last car that ever offered steering wheel climate controls. It was pretty common on American luxury cars cars in the 80s and 90s. Lincolns and Cadillacs had it, and so did the second-gen Prius, but then, unfortunately, it went away. Still, that was a pretty cool feature at the time. However, one uncool feature of this car would have been that there's a button on the steering wheel for the map. You would press that and it would pull up the navigation map in your touchscreen. Only one problem, this car didn't have a navigation system from the factory, so the map button has no function. I don't know why they didn't replace it with like a larger info button, but they didn't, so you have this map button that does nothing except remind you that you're a cheapskate who didn't spring for the nav system. Speaking of unusual buttons, here's one directly below the touchscreen. There's a rather large button that allows you to switch between kilometers per hour and miles per hour, something you'll do very, very rarely, and yet there's a large dedicated button for it. Also odd in terms of buttons here was how to start the car. You can see there's a power button, which is common today, but in 04 was just starting to become common in some cars, but it didn't work like it does now. Consumers were used to putting a key in the car, not just getting in with a proximity key and pressing power, so in order to start this car, you had to insert the key into this slot, and only then did the power button become active for you to start the car and use it. You couldn't just get in and push power. You actually had to push the key in first, kind of negating the purpose of the power button to save time. And another interesting quirk of this Prius, there were some unusual storage compartments in this interior. For instance, in the center control stack, directly below the radio, this just looks like trim, but actually it's a hidden compartment. Open it up, and there's a little storage in there. In the center console, you had a cup holder that wasn't revealed until you flipped open this little lid, and there was your cup holder. And there's another lid kind of opposing it on the other side that had another storage possibility also in the center console. And of course, there was a much larger center console storage area too. You'd lift up your armrest and you can see a big storage compartment in here that also includes a power port, which would have been nice to have, and even an aux port for the stereo, which was pretty forward-thinking back in 04. Now, on the subject of power ports, you actually had another one kind of hidden below the dashboard. You can see down here another 12-volt cigarette lighter style power port to plug in and charge your devices. Now, on the subject of below the dashboard, another rather unusual feature of this Prius was that the dashboard and center controls did not connect to the center console like they did in so many other cars. In the 70s and 80s, you'd see these dashboards and consoles kind of split apart, but by 04, they all connected except in the Prius, which was trying to be weird and succeeded. But it did give you this little space if you wanted to put like a purse there or other storage, I suppose, on the footwell area in the center with its non-connecting center console dashboard. But despite all of the rather interesting weirdnesses of this car, it should be pointed out that the materials were all pretty classic Toyota. In fact, if you look at like the turn signal stalks, the wiper stalks, the window switches and locks, it was all right out of other Toyota models, common parts that were used and tried and tested in other vehicles. Even though they made this car a little bit weird and funky and quirky on the inside, you still had all the typical Toyota buttons that they knew would hold up and be reliable for a long time to come. And next we climb into the back seat of this Prius, where you discover one of this car's biggest tricks and biggest benefits for a lot of the people who bought them, namely the back seat is huge. I have the front seat positioned where I would sit at 6'4", and sitting in the back seat, I have space, and good space for my knees, my legs, my head. There's a ton of room in the front and back of this car. It was packaging genius, particularly when you consider that the Prius was only 175 inches long, which placed it squarely in compact car territory like the smaller Corolla. But Toyota was able to pull off a bigger interior because the engine was so small, they could kind of move everything out and stretch it a little bit. They didn't need that much hood space for the powertrain. And a lot of hybrid components were able to go underneath the car, thereby giving them more space for a larger passenger compartment, which they totally took advantage of. And one of this car's coolest things was just how much space you could get inside despite its relatively small and parkable size. And that was a big deal to a lot of people who were interested in the Prius. Now, with that said, the back seats weren't exactly high-end luxury affairs. You did have cup holders that strangely came down from this panel, the back of the center console. You drop the panel, there are your cup holders, kind of an unusual placement, but but that's what they did. You also had a center armrest that would fold down from the center seat back in here. You could put your arms on for some comfort, and you had little storage pockets on the backs of the front seats, but that was pretty much it in terms of special items in back. Your most special item was just that you had so much space in a relatively small car. And that impressive interior space continued into the cargo area. You open up the hatchback of the Prius and you can see there's a decent amount of cargo space back here, more than you would get in a regular sedan with a trunk, where you were kind of limited in height by the trunk and the rear window. Here with the hatchback, you got more space than you would otherwise, and because there's so much space in the back seats, you can easily fold down those back seats and get access to all of that room as well if you wanted to make it a especially large cargo area. In fact, the massive interior size of this relatively small and relatively unnoticeable Prius has made this car really popular for urban car camping. People who sleep in the back of their cars when they're traveling or just to do it. The Prius is a very common choice for that because of just how much space there is inside this car and how much you don't really notice a Prius parked on a street compared to, say, a big white van that might be easier to sleep in. That raises a few eyebrows, but a Prius, you just walk right by. They're everywhere. Now, the other interesting thing in the cargo area here is that you can lift up the floor in the cargo area and reveal a couple of tools, but more importantly, even more storage space for smaller items. If you wanted to put like fragile stuff down there that you don't want rolling around, or maybe stuff that you don't want potentially being visible in back, you can stick it in the cargo floor, if you will, and get that extra space. So there you go. Those are the quirks and features of this car, which is surprisingly quirky, but I'm especially interested in how it drives. It's been a while since I've driven one of these Prius models, and they were hated by car enthusiasts for their dull, boring driving experience. Let's see if it still feels that way now. All right, driving the original Toyota Prius, and what a car it is. People are gonna make fun of me for doing this video because the Prius was such an anti-enthusiast car, at least that was the thinking. But this car was just such a big deal. It was just such an important car. It had such a massive impact on the car industry. It finally showed people, hey, you don't have to be some like engineering nerd or tech nerd or whatever to buy a hybrid car or to get this, crazy fuel economy benefit. Like, here's a hybrid for the masses. And it was the very first car that did that in several important ways. Number one, it was bigger than the original Prius. So it was like a family-friendly interior in terms of cargo space, but also passenger space. Like, you actually could use it as a family car. And so that had much broader appeal than the small original Prius. But also, it was reasonably affordable. The original Prius was pricey. This one, you had more power, you had more space, you had about the same or maybe less cost. Like, it was a more appropriately priced vehicle. But the big thing I think that this car really did, especially as time has gone on, is it's been reliable. There was a lot of concern about, the hybrid battery is going to fail and these things are going to die and cost so much money to replace. And that has happened to some degree, but like, you still see these all over the place. I've been driving this car now for 2.5 minutes, and I've already seen 3 other original Priuses on the road and several other second-gen Priuses. Like, they are still going and still running. And I know I'm in California where they're more common, but these cars were hits everywhere. I mean, this really did bring the hybrid to everybody, and it was purchased by a massively wide variety of people. It went from liberals who wanted to, be environmentally friendly and show people that, to taxi drivers who wanted an efficient car to bring around their fares, to anybody who just wanted something economical and reasonable, and families and single people. I mean, it had this massive widespread appeal in a way that it really broke ground in the car world, especially for a hybrid car. So with that in mind, let's talk about driving dynamics. Car enthusiasts were never fans of this car. It kind of developed this reputation of being a car that people would drive slowly in the passing lane with their turn signal on, no idea what's going on, because it was never bought by anybody who had any knowledge of like driving as an important activity. And that is certainly clear when you drive it. This car is slow. It does not accelerate quickly. Even though it's a hybrid and has that electric power down low, that doesn't doesn't really benefit it much. It really is not a fast car. The steering is fine, but not special or sporty or exciting in any way. The chassis is certainly not designed for any sort of throwing it around. Like, there was absolutely no attempt to make this car any form of exciting in any way. There's no even little bit of excitement that Toyota tried to inject into this car. Now, to be fair to Toyota, they were making other cars in this era that were exciting. This Prius, they had just come out with a brand new 4Runner. They put a V8 in it for the first time. They were still making the Land Cruiser. That was a big deal. They had that Matrix XRS and the Corolla XRS, the Celica with that variable valve timing engine that everybody loves. Like, they had cool cars. That was not the purpose of this one. That's one of the reasons why I've always kind of felt that some of the enthusiast hate for this car has been not deserved. It served a really, really wide range of people, just not car enthusiasts. And so yeah, like, oh, we hate hybrids, we hate the Prius, whatever. I get that, but at the same time, like, that this wasn't for us. It was for people who wanted things like this. And honestly, it was a really excellent smash hit home run of a car for those people. There's one right there. The fact that there are still so many of these on the road is just proof that this car was a hit and has remained successful in longevity, has been on the side of these. There's a second gen behind me right now. These cars are just they were so ubiquitous because they could do so much as long as driving experience wasn't one of the things that you were trying to accomplish. It's quiet, it's comfortable, there's been a lot of space in here, there's a lot of cargo space in here. Like, it solves all the problems that normies want. And no wonder it was a hit when also combining all that with reasonable pricing and 50 miles per gallon, and what turned out to be this excellent Toyota dependability and reliability. There's another one, same year as this one, a blue one right there. There's another a Prius V, and then another 04 second gen right there. They just are everywhere. And driving this car, again, I'm brought back to 20 years ago and brought back to a reminder of just why they were so. Here's another one. Just why they were so popular and why they are still so ubiquitous today. It really did combine a lot of impressive things into one dull but very capable car. And so that's the 2006 Toyota Prius. These weren't fast or fun or exciting, but they got the job done for hundreds of thousands of people around the world. And no car did more to usher in the era of hybrid technology than this Prius. And you can get this very nice one on Cars and Bids. Anyway, now it's time to give the 06 Prius a DougScore. And the DougScore is here, 39 out of 100, which puts the Prius here against some vaguely similar cars, although they're not really that similar because honestly I never really review cars like the 2006 Toyota Prius. The Prius scores a laughably bad 9 out of 50 in the weekend categories, but it makes up for that with a high daily score, and that seems right as the Prius really is an excellent daily driver car given its strong value, impressive interior space, reliability, and efficiency. The Prius isn't for enthusiasts, but it's still a very important car.